Hey, so I'm Sarthak Tiwari. I'm an undergraduate research leader, and this presentation, this PowerPoint is just going to be on summer research programs and kind of learning about them and how to best apply for them and what they are. So first of all, this is a virtual event, and it is being recorded. So if you're here live and you want to turn your camera off and mute yourself, that would be ideal. And if you have any questions during this, feel free to use the chat feature or raise your hand and let me know if you have any questions. And then there's also time for questions at the end. And then there's just this land acknowledgement that we wanted to put in. So we just acknowledge that this land for the Ute tribe is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Roshute, and Ute tribes. The University of Utah recognizes and respects the enduring relationship that exists between many Indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. We respect the sovereign relationship between tribes, states, and the federal government, and we affirm that the University of Utah's commitment to a partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, and community outreach activities. So just for a brief agenda, these are kind of like the main things we're going to be going over. So the first thing is like, what are summer programs in general? And we'll talk about like how to find them and like different kinds of programs, and then what they require for applications. And then we'll go over two of the main things for applications, which are personal statements and letters of recommendation. So first of all, just a little bit about me. My name is Sarthak Tiwari. I'm a senior in biomedical engineering, so I'm graduating this upcoming spring. I've been in a few summer programs. I was both here. I did the SPUR program at the University of Utah, and I also did a genomics program at UCLA over the summer. So I have some experience with these. I've also applied to a whole host of other ones. I've also presented at national conferences. That picture is actually taken from the BMES conference that happened this year. And I have 3 years of research experience throughout my undergraduate career. And we also have a whole team at the OUR. At the end, you'll get contact information for the office. So this is just like all the people that work there, and they do some really great stuff in terms of helping people get involved with research. So the undergraduate studies, so the Office of Undergraduate Research is under the undergraduate studies. And so they both have their own missions. So the undergraduate studies mission is to help students from admission to graduation, and they just want to provide students with exceptional research and educational experiences to help transform their lives and help increase your education. And the Office of Undergraduate Research is focused on promoting undergraduate student-faculty collaboration, and particularly with diversity and recognizing that excellence and people's work through research. So now we're going to kind of talk about summer programs in general. So the first thing is like, what are summer programs? So these tend to be full-time 8 to 12-week research-focused programs. So they're very research intensive. They're roughly about 40 hours a week, just a full-time research. Sometimes you're not even allowed to take other classes during the program. They offer relatively large stipends, like $4,000 to $6,000 based on the program and how long it is and where they are. You get to work with faculty mentors on usually a specific project, and sometimes the projects are laid out. Sometimes you just get information about the professor and then you kind of choose your own project. But you also get to use these experiences. You get to access the university resources. You get to attend seminars, information sessions, workshops, program meetings, social events, and there's like a whole lot that goes on that's usually put on by the program or by the students in the program. And you also get access to professional development opportunities. You get to sometimes present your work and even publish it in some journals if you progress enough. And sometimes they're like smaller university journals that are easy to publish in. So they also go under many names. SPUR is one of the ones that we have at the U. There's also others like SURF and SURF at other schools. And so there's different names for these programs, but they all fall under the same kind of umbrella. So now there's the question of like why you should do one. So the big thing is, if you want to pursue an academic career, if you want to go to grad school, having a summer program and like these research experiences on your resume will be a great boon to you and will help you immensely in these applications. It really shows your ability to do research. It shows you're passionate about it, and shows that you've actually put some effort into it. And so oftentimes like getting into a summer program is like can almost like guarantee your admission to certain graduate schools. And so it's something that's really good to consider if you want to pursue the academic career. But even outside of that, for like industry positions and other jobs, it can still really help to have those research experiences because it shows your work ethic and it shows your passion for trying to do something and complete these projects. And the other big thing is you get these letter writers. So if you're applying to grad school, letters of recommendation from faculty are super helpful. So working with this faculty full-time for a summer, they really get to know you and they can write a really strong letter for you for graduate school. And they can also be a great contact to list if you're applying to industry positions. The other thing is money. Like I said, you get a nice stipend, but a lot of programs will include housing and sometimes they'll include some other benefits that come with it. And so money isn't really a huge concern during the summer. And the last thing is like, it's a really great time. Like you get to have a ton of fun. You get to interact with a bunch of faculty. You get to meet students with similar interests. Like a lot of people make great friends from these programs and you get to have some great experiences, sometimes in a completely new city. And so it's just a blast to do. And I've enjoyed every program that I've done. So eligibility really depends on the program. Sometimes you have to be a US citizen. Sometimes like you'll have to be a student at a certain school or from a certain ethnicity or demographic. There's all sorts of different requirements. And so for that, you just need to look at what they require. The big thing that almost every school requires is having at least a semester of school left after the program. So meaning you can't have graduated and attend this program. It has to be that you'll still be an undergraduate after completing the program. And again, not all programs have that. Some still allow you or like allow recent graduates to attend. But again, it really depends. And also previous research experience can help, but it's usually not necessary for these programs because these are often to help people get some of their first research experiences. So they don't expect you to already have like the research experience of like a postdoc or something. And so a few types of programs that we have. So at the U, the big one we have is SPUR. So this is open to any student at the U and also students outside of the U. So it's a general program for many different research areas. And so what you can do is you can see a list of advisors on the website. So that's the website is listed right there. If you go to that website, you can see all the different researchers there are. You can also see the projects that they have specifically planned for people. We also have some REUs on campus, specifically the chemistry and physics ones, but there are a few others at that link down there. And so I guess talking about REUs in general, these are sponsored by the National Science Foundation. So it's like a huge national thing and something again you can put on your resume and be like, I was funded by the NSF. But it's very school dependent and generally it's for a specific research area at a specific school. So one might have an REU in like robotics, one might have one in physics. And so they're all over the country. And that this link here, the nsf.gov one, that can take you to the website where you can kind of filter it by like research interests or like by how large the program you want it to be and which schools they're at. And so you can really tone it down and see specifically which programs you want to attend. And then there are some other schools as well. So a lot of schools offer at least one program, sometimes up to a dozen different ones, depending on which school you're looking to. And some of them are also very specialized. So like the UCLA one that I attended, that was like a genomics focused program. And so you'll sometimes have one for biomechanics or chemistry or like quantum computing. Like there's all sorts of very specific programs. And so there's different ways to find them. The ideal way is if you have some sort of connection to faculty or advisors at that university, you can reach out and be like, hey, do you have any summer programs in this? The other option is you can just Google things like searching summer program, University of Wisconsin, and then typing in like specific keywords like biomechanics summer research program and things like that are the best ways to find them. And as I said, these can be more specialized. And so having a specific advisor or professor to get in contact with can help you get connected with those opportunities. So this is just a general timeline that we have listed. So November to December applications open. So most of them have already opened. There's only a handful that maybe haven't. So right now is the time that you want to be looking into programs and deciding if you want to apply. And so that's a great choice to be attending or watching this information session is this is when you want to be considering things because you really want to start requesting your letters of recommendation as soon as possible, especially with some deadlines being like the end of January. That gives the letter writers like a month and a half there's also fall break in the middle, so they may not actually work on it during that whole time. So as soon as you are, like if you think you're going to pursue at least one program, ask those letter writers now, and we'll get more into that a little later on. We have a SPUR workshop posted January 18th next month from 2 to 4 p.m. So if you're applying to SPUR and you want help on specific application materials, you're free to bring those in, and we're happy to look at those and give you some tips. Or if you just have an outline and kind of want to flesh it out more, that's a perfect opportunity for that. And then we have and then the applications tend to be due by the end of January to the end of March. It's a very loose timeline, again, very program dependent. So make sure you look into those now so you can keep track of those dates. And then admissions decisions happen throughout, like until around April. And then the programs are usually between early June, late May, all the way to early or mid-August, depending on the program. And that's kind of like a very rough timeline of events and kind of what you should be considering when looking at these summer programs. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the application. So again, I alluded to this a little bit before. The two things that you really want to focus on are your personal statement and your letters. So we'll talk a little bit about the personal statement. Sometimes that's kind of grouped with the resume. Sometimes they don't allow you to submit a separate resume. And so in cases where you can't have a separate resume, it's good to try to mention as much of those experiences as you can. So you can be like, I had this job or I did this position throughout your personal statement. But the main goal of the personal statement is to emphasize your passion for research, kind of why you want to do the program, why you'd be a good fit. Are there specific professors or areas that interest you? Those are kind of like the main goals of that. And then the letters of recommendation, those are from faculty, your advisors, or other people who can speak to like your specific strengths and emphasize like the qualities about you that would make you a strong applicant for the program. So the personal statement is like the way that you sell yourself. You want to show exactly why you're a good fit for the program, what makes you why they should select you over any of the other applicants. And so for this, you want to discuss your background, you want to discuss your motivation, you want to say why you're pursuing research, what this program would do for you, if anything. And as I said, sometimes you want to discuss those important aspects of your CV or resume, especially if you have research experience. You do want to delve into that and say, like, I did this kind of experience. And you want to mention why this program is a strong fit for you. And again, if you have specific faculty or specific projects that you have in mind, definitely try to mention those, because then it's more clear to the reader what you're applying for and why, like, you're looking at this school instead of something else. And if possible, like if you have any sorts of contributions to diversity, like based on your background, based on some of the work you've done in like outreach, for example, those are good things to include and oftentimes will be specifically mentioned as things to talk about in your personal statement. And then some examples. So I'm gonna show you like some of my personal statements from when I applied to SPUR and when I applied to the other research programs. But the big thing, again, to keep in mind as I'm showing you this is you want to make it as unique to you as possible. You want to show examples. Don't tell the reader that you're interested in this. If you can, like, show your interest by saying like you were so interested you applied to this program or you did this project because this was an area that fascinated you. You, again, want to show what you would gain from the program, like say that like I'm interested in this area, this program will let me explore this area, that's a perfect fit, something like that. The general structure is just you want some sort of personal story, kind of like to bring the reader in and kind of get to know you, then talking about your research and work or courseworks, something that like can connect to your research or like the focus that you want in your research once you're in the program. And then of course, any sorts of future interests, and then you can end it with some sort of like quick summary relating it back to your personal story and saying like why this program's a good fit. And the other big thing is this can help you prepare for graduate school applications, because graduate school applications are almost identical. The only real difference would be sometimes in grad school applications, you need to emphasize more about certain things, or you need to focus more on your research and they expect more research out of you. But in terms of like the basic structure and what they're looking for, it tends to be very similar. And so you can usually pull pieces from like a master statement and tailor it to specific programs. So if you write like a longer one and a program's like, I only want 1 page, you can oftentimes choose the most important parts of your personal statement and then write specifically about that school, like in a paragraph, why that's the best one for you. So as I mentioned, I'm gonna show you some of my examples. So here is the one that I used when I was applying to SPUR. And can you see that, by the way? Okay, perfect.
Yes, you can see it.
All right. Yeah, so this is the one I used when I was applying to SPUR. Not my best personal statement by any means. I also didn't have too much experience back at that time, so there wasn't too much I could write about. But I kind of started with the same structure where I'm like, hey, I really struggle to choose kind of like which area I want to go into. And then I talked about like my research experience and how I explored so many areas. And then I say like, I want to go to SPUR because I want to explore these other areas, like especially neurological research is something that really interests me. And I want to use like machine learning in this research to apply it for future applications. And so, and then I end it by saying I end it by saying like this experience will let me make these future decisions better. And then here I connect it again. Like I say, my decisions have consequences, which is again, connecting back to my initial statement. And so that's kind of like the rough outline in terms of things that you'd want to include. And this is one that I'm using for like my grad school applications. Again, it is different, but very similar in terms of exactly what they're looking for. So they want some sort of personal introduction. So here I kind of talk about my experiences in India and kind of how like seeing the poverty there kind of like shocked me initially, like didn't really understand how to react to it. Then I talk about like my experiences with diversity and kind of being from like a very homogenous, very white area. I kind of like felt like I didn't fit in and didn't belong. And then I kind of use those as like my two themes throughout the rest of the story, kind of connecting back to them. So I get into STEM because like STEM offered me a community, and then I say like how passionate I am about research, how many different areas interested me, and then I kind of go into detail about different research projects that I had. So this paragraph is an example. So basically I just say like, in my sophomore year, I moved to this project which focused on doing this. Then what I did is I used these approaches and I gained skills in this. And then you want to end it by saying kind of like what the results were. So I say my work emphasized these limits, which informed the design and future studies of this probe. And I also was selected for a scholarship because of that. And so things like that are kind of how you want to talk about your research. You want to say what you did, what your contributions were, what you learned, and what the results were. And you really want to focus on the results so that they can see that you're like what your work actually led somewhere, whether that's a publication or a presentation or some sort of scholarship or something, or even just like helping in someone else's project. Because otherwise it's hard to prove that like your work was impactful or that you really contributed much. But if you can show, hey, my work led to this, it had these consequences, that's again something really strong and really solid for exactly what they're looking for. And so again, you're not expected to have like so much research experience to fill up like 3 pages. But if you have any, definitely try to detail it along those lines and try to go into like what made your research experience special. So those are the main things for the personal statement. The next thing is the CV and the resume. So with the resume, you kind of want to be brief and you want to be as direct to the program and emphasize the skills or work experiences that would be important to the program. And you want it to speak to your strengths. And so oftentimes the way you organize it can speak to those specific strengths. So if you have a lot of research experience, put that number 1 for sure. That should be the biggest thing for these summer programs. But if you don't have research experience, sometimes you can put the work experience at the top instead, because that still shows your ability to work with others and be effective in some sort of project or something. So that is still something that can be incredibly helpful and something you should consider. If you need help with your resume at all, the Career and Professional Development Center, or CPDC, they have a bunch of coaches that offer a ton of guidance in this area. They can look at your resume, give you feedback, see if there's specific things you need to include. And they also have some coaches that can kind of talk to you about like the whole process of graduate school. And if you have any questions, they're a great resource. The other thing is if you have any faculty mentors that you can have them look it over, they'll often be the ones who know best what faculty want. And it's usually faculty who review your applications and your personal statement and resume and everything. And a lot of times you can also really develop your resume from these personal summer experiences. So for an example, this is what my resume looked like when I applied to SPUR. It was just kind of like all the generic stuff. I had some research experience, so I tried to kind of like emphasize that. But then there wasn't too much else. I just kind of had like an education section, some skills, some awards, and then some activities and clubs I was involved in. But like you're not expected to have a whole lot, especially if you're early in your undergraduate education. They're not expecting like 5+ years of research experience. And so that's like kind of the general way that you want to structure it. This is my more updated resume on the left now. So you can see it starts the same where I go into research experiences, but now I have more. And this was my experience from the SPUR program. So you see that like the program really helps you gain a lot of these skills, and it helped me get into other programs in the future. And so it's something that's super helpful to apply as soon as possible because it can open up future doors. And then see that I go into like publications and presentations. Also big in academia is if you can't have anything like that, that's a really big help in terms of showing your ability to perform research that leads to tangible conclusions. Any sorts of skills and abilities, honors, other experience, and then education or outreach are my main things. But again, if you have different experiences and you think there are certain things that speak to your ability as an applicant better, focus on those for sure. So the next thing is the letters of recommendation. So as I mentioned before, these are super important. You want people who can really speak to your strengths as an individual. And if you have someone that you know really knows you well, that can often really stand out in a letter, especially if they have a high opinion of you. They can be like, this is one of the best students that I've worked with in years or something. That looks really good on a letter of recommendation. Now, the best time to ask for them is, as I mentioned, as soon as possible. This week, if you know you're going to apply for these programs, just reach out this week. And when you do reach out, make sure you ask, are you willing and able to provide a strong letter of recommendation? Because a lot of times faculty will be like, I mean, I'll provide you a letter of recommendation, but it'll be very generic and I don't know you well enough to say anything really positive. So specifically ask them, can this be a strong letter? Do you have any reservations about that? Is there anything else you need from me? Often they'll ask for like a CV or resume to look at, kind of like refer to when writing your letter. Sometimes they'll ask for a personal statement. So if you have anything like that, definitely send it to them or ask them if you want them to send it to them. And again, like the point is you want to make sure that they can actually speak to you as a researcher, as a student, as a community outreach person, as long as you can show some sort of engagement. And the other thing is it's okay to ask them to put in specific points, like if you got a scholarship that you're really proud of, or if you like found a project super interesting and want them to mention that in their letter. Those are things you can absolutely ask. You can be like, hey, would you mind including this statement or saying something along the lines of this? So it really isn't a huge deal at all. And if they are able to mention things like that, then they will, otherwise they won't, but it's not a huge deal either way if it just doesn't hurt to ask. The other thing is when you ask for letters, there are some people that will be ideal. So like the ideal is if you have some sort of research faculty mentor or professor, those are generally the best. If you can get it from a postdoc or grad student in the lab instead, those aren't as great, but it can be really good depending on your field, and especially if you have research experience, someone who can speak about it still helps a lot. And sometimes like your grad student may be the one who ends up writing the letter, but it's signed by your faculty mentor. So definitely try to reach out to your faculty mentor first if possible, if you have one. But otherwise, again, grad students and postdocs are still good options. And then academic advisors are another good resource. So those are kind of like the main academic ones. But if you've worked in industry or some sort of like community outreach kind of position, like any sort of supervisor or teacher or community leader are also great options. The only concern is they may need some more guidance and kind of like what to include in the letter and specific things to say, because they probably don't have as much experience with writing these letters. And some might even ask you to write or draft parts of the letter, and that is more work for you, but it also lets you emphasize the specific things you want to. And of course, like they'll be the ones who still edit it and make sure like you're not saying something extreme, like you're the best student they've ever had in like 10 years or something, if it's not true. But oftentimes that is something you have to consider. And so if you don't have the time or don't want to write something like that, you can always reach out to someone else instead. And again, like the whole point is you want it to speak to your specific strengths. And so if you're able to write it, sometimes that can really help, and then they don't have to think about what things include. And so kind of like going over what letters should include. So preferably they would be written by a faculty mentor who can attest to your research and motivation for research and some sort of classroom performance. But again, there are other people who can write them, and there are situations where it might be better to get others to write them. You want them to include your relationship, kind of like how long you've known each other, why you know each other, and anything else along those lines. And then the final thing is like what makes you a strong candidate for the program. So if you have like a lot of research experience and you want them to mention that, that can be something that's really good. If your mentor is able to, specifically mentioning like this student would be a great fit for X program, and like specifically writing out the name of the program at which university, again, super helpful, but not necessary. I know a lot of even grad schools expect letters to be very generic and kind of just like, this is a strong student for any program or something like that. And that's also okay. Again, it depends on what your mentor is comfortable with and what they want to do. And if you think they're comfortable with it and they're able to say something like how you compare to their other students, like they're a top 5% student, or like they're the best student I've had in years, that actually does go a really long way, because it kind of can show the committee like what the difference is between a student with like a strong GPA versus a student with strong GPA and strong recommendations that are like, this is one of the best and most motivated students I've seen. And oftentimes that can override things like your GPA or your lack of research experience, if you can show that motivation and willingness to really put in the work and the effort. So that's kind of like the main thing. I'm just going to summarize everything that we talked about during this. So again, these programs offer a ton of benefits, and they're things you should definitely consider if you're interested in a future in research or academia or graduate school or anything along those lines. Research really helps. They also open a ton of doors in the future. Like, as I mentioned, a lot of my opportunities only came because of my experiences at SPUR and the research I was able to do because of the experiences I got through these programs. So they will very much help you in your future endeavors. And they also aren't a huge financial burden. As I mentioned, you get a decent stipend over the summer. You also get free housing almost all the time. And oftentimes you get things like free food as well. And again, these applications aren't ridiculously long. You don't have some sort of like SAT test to study for. It's just a personal statement and of course, letters of recommendation. And for personal statements, one thing I didn't mention is there's also the University of Utah Writing Center, and they offer some excellent advice on personal statements, kind of like making sure your grammar is correct and everything, but also any sort of general advice, like how to structure things, how to make things seem more impactful, and how to like overall just make your application shine compared to others. So the last thing is, again, you want to look into these programs and try to decide as soon as possible and send those requests for letters in if you're able to. And then the final thing I wanted to talk about was just kind of SPUR. So I mentioned SPUR a few times. That's kind of the research program that we have at the University of Utah. So there are some others, but this is kind of a general one that encompasses a bunch of different fields. So it's offered to University of Utah students as well as students outside. So 35 to 40 hours a week that they expect you to work. This includes but on top of, like, while it is mostly research that you're working during those hours, They also have like these education series events, program meetings, and they also allow you to publish it in the Undergraduate Research Journal and present it at a symposium at the end of the summer. And so it's a really fun experience. You gain a ton of friends. You get to learn about a bunch of cool research. And it runs from May 24th to August 3rd this year. So it's a 10-week program, doesn't interfere with any sort of like classes during the spring or fall semester. And you also get a $5,000 stipend and on-campus housing. And the on-campus housing is in Benchmark. So you get, it's like an apartment style. You get your own room all to yourself. It's great housing for sure, not like the normal dorms. So I definitely recommend. It's free housing. I would take it every day. And if you don't have a U card, like if you're from out of state or something, then you get the same benefits of a U card. So you get 40 projects to pick from. So there's over 40 projects. And in the application, you pick the 3 that you're most interested in. So if you're into like mechanical engineering, there's a few projects in there and you can kind of choose the ones that best fit your interests, but you can even choose outside of your major. And if there's like a project that's somewhat similar, but really interests you, those are things you can look into. So that's the link again on the left. It's just our.utah.edu/SPUR. And the application deadline is January 29th. So try to have your applications in. And as I mentioned before, we have the workshop. So that's happening again. That's going to be January 18th from 2 to 4 p.m. So if you are able to draft anything, and just make sure you send your request for letters out before then. But if you have some drafts or some outlines, please bring them in and we're more than happy to help you with that once that comes. So thank you all for coming and listening. And this is my contact information, and that's the Office of Undergraduate Research. And that more general contact information for the office is listed here. So yeah, thank you all for coming, and let me know if you have any questions.